So I'm going to apologize right now. So I'm going to apologize right now because I thought we were live for the last 10 minutes and we weren't. So I get to restart my entire talk. So sorry if you're like if you were tuning in being like, where is this thing? I'm here now. A couple of announcements before we get going. First is that the synagogue, where I'm seated right now in the entryway, the Synagogue Museum on Water Street is open the second Saturday of every month throughout. Let's get that right there. Throughout the spring, into spring rather, as we have a lot of winter weather going to be bearing down on us. Also, if you'd like to connect with the Portage County Historical Society, the Arctic Run model train show is coming up this weekend at the Holiday Inn Hotel and Convention Center, and we will be there selling books and having information on the Historical Society as well as other merchandise and things. So hope to see you this weekend at the Holiday Inn for the Arctic Run model train show. Now that I realize that we're actually live, thanks for sticking with us. I'm really sorry if you were like, what the heck's going on right now? I'm here. My name is John Harry. I'm the executive director of the Portage County Historical Society. This is an installment of the Talking Points Historical Education Programming Series, which is made possible by a grant from the Community Foundation of Central Wisconsin. So every month for almost the whole last year now, we've been looking to present a new talk that covers a different aspect of the history of Portage County. And this one looks to cover some of these stories of the county's smaller communities, namely the unincorporated communities. Often the history of our county is dominated by larger cities and villages like Stevens Point, Plover, even Roshold and Amherst can overshadow some of these smaller communities where people have lived and worked and had their own histories. So this presentation looks to show the role of those unincorporated communities in the history of Portage County. So let's get into the talk. What does unincorporated mean? So this is the kind of the government's definitions. If a town is unincorporated, it means it does not have a local government. Unincorporated communities exist, quote, by tradition. We might know that there's an intersection that you call, something down the road, but they typically do not have elected officials at the town level. There's also another kind of unincorporated community called a CDP. And a CDP means census designated place. And the government's definition for what a CDP is a statistical geography representing closely settled unincorporated communities that are locally recognized and identified by name. So, for example, a couple of those are going to be in the talk where you're like, they don't have their own municipal government? That's crazy. Like Polonia or Bancroft. So those are CDPs. So they're known as like this statistical area where like, yeah, there's a town there, but they actually never incorporated. They don't have their own municipal government. So let's talk about what this talk is actually going to cover. On the left, you see a map that is all of the townships throughout the county they have the government, right? So if you live in the town of Sharon, you have the government there that you vote for and elect and can go to meetings and whatnot. You can run for office there. The big blue blob in the middle of that map is Stevens Point, Whiting, and the village of Plover, which is separate from the town of Plover, which you see surrounds part of that right there. But we're going to be talking about the smaller communities within these larger areas. So the map on the right is kind of our guide as we kind of take an unincorporated tour around the county. That map is from 1912 I just highlighted the Portage County section of that map. So we're going to be getting into about 10-ish of the unincorporated counties that exist in Portage County. There's actually almost 30 unincorporated communities in Portage County, though some of these places proved so small that little or no historical record exists in them. No, I'm prepared that some of you may have more information on some things that I may have missed. So if you do, I'm not afraid. You can put those in the comments. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments, and we'll do a short Q&A if anybody has any questions at the end of the program here tonight. So don't forget to take advantage of that. I love the interaction. Some of these places actually have both unincorporated and incorporated communities within them. which is kind of confusing, but one of them, which we're going to start with, is Albin. So this community contains, like I said, both incorporated and unincorporated in the same name. Looking back at the map here, you can see that the township of Albin is this big section here, but there's still an unincorporated community within the town. The community is located, there was actually a different Albin located, if you look just south of where we are on this map that's being shown here, where I have Albin highlighted, the township. If you go south from there, there's the village of Peru, which is another unincorporated community. Unfortunately, not a lot of information exists on that. There was actually a place there named Albin at one point that had a post office in 1873, but it was moved north into the town of Albin in 1880 to a home on Highway A about a half mile south of Highway 66. That post office is the only one besides Rosholt in that whole township. But that was discontinued in 1905. The community, though, still is Albin up there, but there's still an unincorporated area within that whole township that is known as Albin. Like I said, it kind of gets confusing. Why is it called Albin, though? It has nothing to do with what's up there. It has to do with this man who's a Civil War hero, as it is, and a pioneer to Portage, not only the state of Wisconsin, but Portage County. Absolutely. So this story is not so much about Albin, the place, but who the community is named after, who is Colonel James Albin, who you see here. So Albin was born in Ohio in 1810 and moved to Wisconsin in 1838 to Sauk Prairie. So that's right after a major treaty was signed with Native Americans that opened up large swaths of land to white settlement in the state. So he moves to Sauk Prairie in 1838, where he and his family were said to be the first white people in Sauk County. He was a lawyer. He had gotten a law degree or was an apprentice as a lawyer in Ohio. It was a little looser of definitions in those days, but he was a lawyer in Sauk County. But his wife, his childhood sweetheart named Amanda, died in 1843, and he decided that he was going to move north. So in 1844, he moves north to this little tiny village on the Wisconsin River called Plover. Plover in 1844 had just been chosen as the county seat for the new Portage County. Portage County actually extended all the way down to the city of Portage that we know now in Columbia County and just went straight northward, and they kept on chopping it off. And they finally created in 1844 this county called Plover. And so again, this is pre-statehood. This is territorial government. So in Plover, Albin becomes an established attorney, also was elected county judge, and then becomes state senator. He's got a pretty good gig going. He establishes a ferry service between Plover and Mill Creek, which was the first on the upper Wisconsin River. So literally blazing trails through the woods up here. And then he gets remarried, and his family lived as comfortably as you could on the frontier. It was pretty rough up here at that time. But the Civil War breaks out in 1861, and Albin had an opinion on the issues surrounding the Civil War, namely slavery, which was, the cause of the whole thing. In the years leading up to the war, Albin and a man named Jervis Carter started an anti-slavery newspaper called the Plover Herald. And the paper called slavery, quote, that cursed, detestable, and abominating institution. So when the war breaks out, Albin, even though he's getting a little older, is not going to sit on the sidelines. He's going to take action. He organizes a regiment called Company E, which was made up of men from around Portage County and some from the fringes of Portage County as well, like Plainfield and Mosinee. The men of the regiment trekked by foot in the middle of winter to train in Milwaukee, which sounds just miserable. So the winter of 1861-62, they trek all the way down to Milwaukee by foot and horseback. They get to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee isn't always the greatest place to be in the middle of winter either, weather-wise. And so they were never actually totally trained or what they called mustered in. So they were in Milwaukee. They were there for a couple of months, but the war is starting to rage, especially on the western frontier, right around the Mississippi River. And so they get dispatched to sail south to St. Louis, where they're expecting to find more training because they hadn't had a lot of it. And these men are not professional soldiers, right? They were farmers and lawyers like Albin here. So they sail south to St. Louis, but instead of quickly or of more training, there was action going on the western frontier that they had to be deployed right away. So they were not fully trained. They were dispatched to Tennessee for what has become known as the Battle of Shiloh. And that is one of the bloodiest days in American history. Over 24,000 casualties on the battlefield. Just awful stuff. And one of those casualties was James Albin. So it was there on the Battle of Shiloh on April 7th, 1862, that Albin was shot from his horse by a sharpshooter and he died. He was brought back to Wisconsin and he's actually buried at Plover Cemetery. So you can go pay your respects to James Albin. And that is why the community and the township and all that was named after him. The Albin name did remain prominent after Civil War. His brother had followed him to Wisconsin. His brother's name was William, and he was a county judge and a superintendent of schools. Gradually, though, the family died off, moved away. There's actually, that I know of, and you can correct me if you know differently, no Albin descendants in Portage County today. However, the town of Albin, the unincorporated community, they still bear the name of the colonel. So that's good to keep his memory alive as somebody who tried to do something very extraordinary in the face of a national crisis. Moving on to our next community, down south of Albin. We're moving a little further south of Stevens Point, kind of close to Plover. You see the circle in the center of the map. We're going to Arnett. From 1882, this is from the Stevens Point Daily Journal, that is announcing that Arnett is the name of the new station in the town of Stockton. So the Stockton is the larger township on the Green Bay and Western Railway. It is located on William Plummer's land near Calvin Richmond's and will be a great convenience to farmers living in that vicinity. The new depot is already completed and trains now stop there. Cargill and Brothers of La Crosse have built a large warehouse and buy all kinds of farm produce. This is a big deal for a small farming community like Arnett. The farmers in that neighborhood who will be mostly benefited by this new market can thank Misters Arnett, Richmond, and Bremer, as it was through their energy that the depot was established. They canvassed the county and raised the required sum of $500 for the company, together with 1 1/2 acres of land. The company was named the station Arnett after the Honorable William L. Arnett, one of the prominent farmers in the town and one of the guys who got it done. So there's William Arnett right there. So yes, like the newspaper announced, the community was formed in 1882 and named after William Arnett. It was a farmer who served as the chairman of the town of Stockton. And he was also on the Portage County Board, as well as being elected to the Wisconsin legislature in 1876. He had no rest in his bones, did everything. In 1872, the Green Bay and Western Railroad laid tracks through the new portion was now Arnett. And so 1881, 1882, Arnett, Joseph Bremer, Calvin Richmond canvassed the countryside, raising that money to build that railroad depot. Really coming together. And so here's what a depot looked like. Pretty neat stuff. That was what was in Arnett. So 1882, having raised the required $500, getting the acres of land donated from a man named William Plummer, the depot was finally built. The railroad company was named Arnett in honor of William's effort. Arnett, unfortunately, he died in 1907. But he really developed that whole area of the town of Stockton and what we now know as Arnett, which is still a little Main Street area in the county today. I love going through Arnett. The depot was an important place for the residents of the little hamlet there because it was the starting point for journeys to Stevens Point, Amherst Junction, even Green Bay. It provided opportunities for the residents to transport and sell their products around the state. So farm products from Arnett could go all over, and it flourished. So here's another photo. This I'm guessing is 1890s, maybe early 1900s. You see the train car with the Green Bay and Western. Arnett doesn't look too different today, but there it is right there. Arnett seems like this quiet little community nestled on Highway J in the town of Stockton, right? But I found an article that the Journal had put out, and a longtime resident who has since passed, named Charlie McCuskey, who grew up in the area, remembers when things used to get a little lively. So he said this was a rough town on dance nights. So they would have dance nights in these different saloons in Arnett. Here's one of those saloons. Great saloon pictures in Arnett, which I'm glad there's still at least one saloon in Arnett. So that tradition still carries on. But McCuskey had reported that people used to go outside the dance hall and fight with cranks and 2x4s. There was a lot of excitement back then, is what he said, which is pretty crazy. Not something I think I'd be like, yeah, let's go out and fight, but that's what happened. Arnett made national news, or at least statewide news, in 1972. This agricultural backdrop set the scene for a visit from a presidential candidate in 1972, and Hubert H. Humphrey. He made the rounds through Wisconsin. He talked at UWSP. He was on the square in Stevens Point, and then wanted to appeal to the small town rural audience. And so in 1972, in March of that year, Hubert H. Humphrey stopped in Arnett. So this is the only part of this talk where we mention any sort of presidential candidate stopping by. So Arnett has that going for it. Moving further south from Arnett, down to Bancroft. Bancroft's one of those communities where I'm like, that's unincorporated, because you go through there and it seems like it is, but it's actually governed by the town of Pine Grove. So let's get into Bancroft. Bancroft is in the northwestern corner of the town of Pine Grove. It was organized in 1856. The town of Pine Grove was named for a prominent pine, piney grove, as the name suggests, in the center of town. Bancroft is the only community in the town of Pine Grove, so not a whole lot of making sense here. But the community was named after Reverend Warren G. Bancroft, who was a pioneer Methodist pastor. The railroad, which passed within a mile of Bancroft, was the main catalyst for the Bancroft's growth. A train depot, which you see right here, we'll get into in just a second. 2 warehouses for potatoes and a stockyard were located near the train tracks. Everything's gone today, and I say gone, but not really, because that train depot you see in that picture right there still exists, because the Portage County Historical Society saved it in 1988 and 1989. The Historical Society moved the entire train depot, which had been pretty dilapidated at that point. They moved it to Heritage Park. So we have it now. My forerunners within the Historical Society had the foresight to save this historical gem. And so you can see what a small town railway station looks like when you come to Heritage Park this coming summer, when we have our open hours once again. So I hope to see you there. Edwin L. Rich was the first postmaster of Bancroft's post office, which was established in 1876. Bancroft once had a hotel and a general store. It also had a newspaper, which quit publication around 1909. And churches, where we haven't talked a lot about churches yet, but there are quite a few churches we're going to talk about on this unincorporated tour of Portage County. One of them being Bancroft's First Baptist Church, which it was the only church in the community. It had about 25 members. The church began in kind of a colorful way. Just after 1900, Reverends Rust and Spur arrived in Bancroft August 1902 in a railroad car known as the Glad Tidings Chapel car. So they were traveling preachers with their own railroad car. And when they got to Bancroft, which is where I guess they wanted to set up, they held services in the railroad car for about a year until the church was built in 1903 on land donated by Sarah Rich, who was the widow of Edwin L. Rich, the Bancroft's first postmaster. Which is pretty interesting to think about a church starting in a railway car, but there you have it. The first pastor was Elder H. Powell of Plainfield, and in 1912, the Reverend Gillespie became the first pastor to live in the parsonage in that community, and the congregation had been built. Near the turn of the century, Bancroft also supported a 19-person concert band and a baseball team. So there was happening things going on at Bancroft at one point. The community also had a large potato warehousing center from 1890 to 1930. And there's still a lot of potato farmers in the area of Bancroft today. Bancroft State Bank was founded in 1912, and there were a lot of different small town banks located throughout the county. But Bancroft has an interesting distinction that this bank was robbed 3 times. One of the biggest being in 1958, which is the picture on the right, was taken when they were investigating that robbery, and they put the picture in the paper. So that's the inside of Bancroft State Bank, as appeared in the Stevens Point Journal in 1958. That one, they caught the guy with about $2,500 in Marshfield. So they found him. But it kind of got me thinking that maybe we should do a talk on robberies, bank robberies, or different things like that throughout the county at some point, because it appears it happened a few times. It was rough and tumble. And then the other thing to talk about with Bancroft was in 1956, longtime Bancroft residents may remember when their community was struck by a tornado, April 3rd, 1956. The twister damaged several buildings and killed a couple people in Bancroft and injured a number of people. So here on the left, you see what they put in the paper as the tornado's path. So on the bottom left, you see the circle with the marks on it. That's where it started. But the second circle is Bancroft. And so it still had a lot of force, even though it continued all the way up to the Amherst area. Bancroft got hit the hardest as far as actual populated areas go. And pictures on the right of that wreckage. So pretty devastating stuff for a small town like Bancroft. Let's move on to a new stop on the tour, Custer. Not a lot written about Custer, which is kind of surprising because it's pretty busy on Highway 10 getting through Custer there. And so I thought there would be more, but there's a few things to talk about. The Custer Post Office was established in 1876, just 6 months after the Battle of Little Bighorn. So that is when the Native American tribes in the Dakotas surrounded and totally decimated the regiment of Colonel George Armstrong Custer. And so there were a lot of memorializing of Custer and his men after that. And one of them happens to be the little town here of Custer. So there's another theory that Custer visited the community before his death. I don't know if that carries any weight. But that was not the original name of the community, actually. It was actually called Dawson. An Irish name given to a predominantly Irish community. So there were a lot of Irish people in that area. The thing that was kind of the anchor of the area for a long time, other than the taverns, which there still are a few, was that there was a church there that is St. Mary's of the Immaculate Conception. And so that is still north of Highway 10 in Custer. But the one document that they found actually in the church was dated August 8th, 1854. It was a land deed marking the sale of a large chunk of land near the church to Michael Dawson. So that may be how they got the name Dawson. There's no biographical name or information about him in any of the documents. But there was a Michael Dawson that was elected to the town of Hull board in 1859 and the Sharon board in 1860. So maybe it was the same guy, maybe owned a lot of different land. In Dawson's will, which was dated 1897, he gave the entire estate to his son, John. To his wife, Catherine, he bequeathed a cow named Big Red Cow. And to his 7 children, he left $1 each. Boy. So his son, John, really got the big one there. His daughter, Bridget, he left $100 payable within 10 years of his death. So for some reason, kept back off of that one. No idea why that was. Maybe making her wait for it for maybe they had something going on. But yeah, this is how the church came into founding because of this as well. The church was founded in 1875. There are 4 taverns in Custer in the late 1800s. 2 service stations popped up, a blacksmith shop, a post office, creamery, a ballroom, and 4 potato warehouses. A lot of potato, right, in this part of the world, and 3 grocery stores actually in the 1960s. The railroad tracks were laid in the town of Stockton in 1871. That's when the railroad came through Stevens Point as well, which must have been a big thing for Custer, that they could ship their agricultural goods all over the place. There was also a passenger depot for trains that doesn't exist anymore, as well as a one-room schoolhouse. In 1999, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association moved their energy fair and headquarters to Custer, which is one of the more recent moments of history on our tour through unincorporated Portage County today. So still making history in some of these smaller areas throughout the county. All right, so this is a good one. This was probably one of my favorite stories, is how these two interesting communities got founded. So the town of Sharon is what you're going through right there, where Ellis and Polonia exist today. There was a main road for logging operations between mills and the camps. Was right near Ellis and Polonia. And so lumberjacks, teamsters on their horse-drawn wagons, farmers driving to Stevens Point, they often stopped in the area to wet their parched throats. There was a meeting place for a mixture of foreigners in these different saloons, including Germans, Irishmen, and notably Poles. Although at one point in time, there was many Germans as there were Poles in this area. But what Ellis became was known as Poland Corners. So the Poles really took over that part of the county. Michael Kozakowski was the first Pole to settle near what is now Polonia. And so the Poles followed out to that part of the county. So it wasn't known as Ellis right away. It was known as Poland Corners or Polish Corners. There were 2 stores, 3 churches, a post office, and a hotel that were in what became known as Ellis in the 1870s. Polonia, meanwhile, had a tavern and a store, and we'll get to Polonia in just a second. Ellis was noted for its frequent disturbances of the peace. No one was ever killed there, but there were 4 saloons, pretty much one on each corner. Within 4 years of the issuance of the first liquor license in 1866. So there was a lot of carousing going on in Poland Corners. And there were churches too. So you have churches and taverns, and that's kind of where the story gets interesting. It was called, I'm just going to get right away, it was called Ellis later because of Albert Gallatin Ellis, A.G. Ellis, who was a noted statesman in the area. He was a surveyor general, founder of the first newspaper in the state of Wisconsin and in Portage County, as well as an early mayor of Stevens Point. His portrait actually is right behind me right here. But so later, after Ellis dies, is when Poland Corners gets renamed Ellis, maybe trying to break some of the stigma of what the Poland Corners name had brought with all the taverns there. But there were 3 churches in Ellis, 3 churches that catered to different nationalities in the area. One on the east side of County J was the First National Polish Church. West of Poland Corners was St. Martin's Church, which is still around today. And east of Four Corners was St. Joseph's Church. And church parish communities were not only the spiritual lifeblood of these immigrant communities, and particularly Polish immigrant communities in Portage County, but also the foundation of social life. So you had the taverns and the churches, and that was it. Near Polonia, there were many families of German and Irish and even French descent. They're all Roman Catholic. So a parish was created at Polish Corners in 1858. And the priest there was a guy named Father John Polak, who served at St. Stephen's in Stevens Point as well from 1860 to 1862. He was one of the only Polish-speaking priests outside of Milwaukee. Many Poles settled in the area based on that alone. In 1863, the number of Polish families in the vicinity of Ellis and Polonia had increased to almost 30, and a separate Polish church had been built. And so there was a new father in town, or new priest in town rather, named Father Joseph Dabrowski. He was in Ellis between 1870 and 1882, and a conflict arose between the church and nearby saloon owners. The church at Poland Corners stood across the road from all these saloons, whose owners refused to close on Sundays during their service. due to the noise from the saloons, also due to the fact that people were not showing up to church, the priest actually had the church moved a mile further east, which essentially founded what we now know as Polonia. A faction of the congregation, though, stayed in Poland Corners or Ellis. The saloon keepers opposed the church's move, and they actually seceded from the church because Sundays were a big day for business for them. Why would we want to remain closed when everybody's coming in? You go to church, you come out, you have some drinks at the saloon. So they erected a new church building and employed 2 priests who they later discovered had been excommunicated from the church. The outcome was that the church totally failed, went out of business as it is. And the bishop condemned their effort. Like, this is not a real Catholic church here. So in 1871, the church was moved and a rectory was soon added. So this is the Dabrowski, the actual Catholic church. And in 1871 or 75, a series of fires totally decimated the complex. The last fire was suspected to be the work of an arsonist related to the troubles at Poland Corners. So we'll probably never know. But after the fire, a new cornerstone was laid for a new church, which was called the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. So now let's talk about those churches in Polonia. So the new church was completed in 1881, and that is the church that you see on the left. That church lasted until 1903 when, you guessed it, another fire took that church out. So in response, the congregation built the largest of the Sacred Heart churches that you see in the middle of this slide here. It was the largest church in Wisconsin, north of Milwaukee at that time. This thing is massive. Just look at the size of the doors in the front versus the top of the steeple. It is a shame that church does not exist anymore. It was reputedly large enough to hold the present church congregation inside with room to spare. So it was huge. And this church stood until 1934, when it too burned to the ground when a lightning strike hit it and set it on fire. So super sad. So this leads us to the 4th and current Sacred Heart Church, which still stands today, which you can see on the right, which is still worth going to check out if you've never been inside. It's beautiful. Other than the religious life in Polonia, the first store in Polonia may have been built in 1876 by August Bischoff. The village never did incorporate, so that's why it's on this unincorporated tour here. As far as what happened in Ellis, there's no real stores in Ellis now. There's a couple of bars, a couple of businesses that are located there. But interesting thing about Ellis is there used to be, and something I want to dig into more, a hop house. So there used to be hop farming in Portage County, and they need to cure the hops. You had to dry them out so that you could actually add them into the beer. You wouldn't keep them fresh. They would spoil. You would have to dry them out so that they wouldn't. So that actually, Ellis was part of that. So something worth digging into. All right. Up next on the tour, Fancher and Smoky Spur. So Smoky Spur doesn't even make the list here. Smoky Spur's pretty small, pretty much just a blip on the map. If you're going along on the Tomorrow River State Bike Trail, you might have seen Smoky Spur because there's a saloon there. So Fancher and Smoky Spur represent a community that shares those names. Highway K and at the Stockton-Amherst town line there. The community was created when the Green Bay and Western Railroad, so the same one that goes through Arnett, came through, and they built a Y on the tracks so that it could serve the potato warehouses in the area, which created a spur known as the Smoky Spur. And so they did not create a depot there. Instead, they're like, we'll just have a tavern where people can wait, which is the tavern you see right there. Still around today, which is pretty cool. Great place to stop in. A post office got established in the area, though, in 1891, and the first postmaster was named Orson Fancher. So that's how the community bore his surname. And so Fancher is most well known for the church that you see right here, which is the St. Mary of Mount Carmel Church. There were a large influx of Polish settlers, just like Polonia, that came to this region in the 1870s. They were from Kashubia, which is in the northwestern region of Poland near the Baltic Sea. Many of them had left Poland because of dissatisfaction with land policies imposed by the conquering Germans who had moved into the area. So the Kashubians were mostly farmers and fishermen. They were a hardy stock. There's an interesting Kashub story to go with the state, namely Milwaukee. So if you ever want to learn more about the Kashubs, go down to Milwaukee. They had a whole island, a fishing village right in Milwaukee there too. So, but we're pretty lucky that they came up here too and made a community. So in 1884, 5 acres of land were purchased for $50. The new church was built. The first church was pretty rudimentary, just a wood small structure. But it was part of the Green Bay Diocese at that point. It wasn't a part of something closer. A larger church that you see here was completed in 1894 at a cost of $4,300, which was a large sum of money in 1894. Fire destroyed it in 1904, which leads to the building that we still have today. So this is built on that foundation from 1894 and 1904. Parish school with 150 pupils were taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph, which opened in 1912, which was the first parochial boarding school in the state of Wisconsin, although a decline of teaching sisters and smaller enrollments caused the school's closure in 1970. But if you're ever out in that area, I totally recommend you stop at this church. It's just absolutely stunning. Both inside, outside, the cemetery is really fascinating as well. And if you notice on the right, the gate at the front of the church, the translation of that Polish is "God bless Poland." So never has lost its Polish identity, which is pretty great. All right, we have just a couple more stops on the unincorporated tour of Portage County here, which the first of which being Jordan. So something that in 1912 from this map here didn't even show up on the map, so I had to create where it mostly is right there. The town of Hull was actually the site of 2 smaller communities. There was an unincorporated community of Hull, as well as Jordan. So there was the Pulaski School, which was now the nature center at Jordan County Park. There was also a grocery store that also served as the post office there from 1864 until 1903. And the Jordan area was platted in 1856 for the development of the South Jordan Dam on the east side of the Plover River, where the sawmill was located. So really, it had a lot to do with the dam going in the area. So that's the photo I'm going to use for this part of the talk, because there's not a ton of photos of Jordan, but here's some photos of the one of the earlier dam encasements here, which obviously there's a new one, which we'll talk in a little bit. But that there was a village actually in Jordan, because you might think like there was nothing ever really there, was there? There was actually proof of it was in General A.G. Ellis's. We'll bring him back up. He put out a handbook of Stevens Point in the Upper Wisconsin, written in 1857. He says, quote, "Jordan is the name of the new village on the Plover River. At present, there are some 40 buildings, of which 23 are dwellings. The rest are outbuildings, barns, and mills. It has a population of 165 people. Here is located the extensive sawmill of the Wisconsin Lumber Company. There's a grocery store, blacksmith shop, and a match factory in Jordan. The mill cuts 5 million feet of lumber and 45,000 bundles of lath in a season. Logs are cut from 9 to 15 miles up the Plover, and supply is said to be inexhaustible." When would we ever lose these logs, right? On the opposite side of the river is located the hill of Hugh McGreer. So Hugh McGreer is really the one who started the village and had a mill there. The other families around were the Muzzies, the Vaughns, the Mains, and the Wadleys. So a few of those names might sound familiar, as well as the Walkers and the Van Orders. But the first grocery store was operated by an F.W. Muzzy, who was the first postmaster for the post office of Hull. And the other owners were owned by the Marshall family. Christ Marshall was the last serving postmaster in 1943. But the real big thing there is, like I said, the dam. So it was almost 30 years that the village existed, gradually declining as lumbering, which was his lifeblood, started to go away. But with the disuse of water power for milling reasons, its value for electrical power did come up. So in 1904, the Stevens Point Lighting Company and their owner, Arthur Van Order, who lived in that area, constructed a power mill there. In 1905, the Stevens Point Journal reported that the current is turned on. The incandescent lights shone more brilliantly than they have for some time under steam power. By 1916, the facilities were sold to the Wisconsin Valley Electric Company, which also absorbed at that time the Stevens Point Power Company. And in June of 1933, the Wisconsin Valley Electric Company merged with the Standard Gas and Electric Company, becoming the Wisconsin Public Service Company, which we have today, which operates Stevens Point's light and power facilities, all around. The construction of the water diversion plant at Jordan was greeted with great excitement around the turn of the century. In 1965, though, the city, the area had other power sources, and so they closed the historic power plant. But the Public Service Company did something pretty cool, and that is they gifted the land to the Portage County Park Commission and made possible this beautiful county park that we have today. When I lived away from the area, we would camp at Jordan Park. The Nature Center is great when they have programming there and the little amphitheater outside. And I just love Jordan Park. So I'm glad that after the power company moved out, that it became such a great public entity as Jordan Park is today. One of the best places to view a sunrise, sunset, do ice fishing, do all sorts of fun things on the Jordan Pond there. So glad that is what it turned out to be for the town of Jordan. One more stop up the road from Jordan is Torrin. The town of Dewey, where this is located, much of its land is dominated by the Dewey Marsh, so sparsely populated. Also has two communities, Torrin and Crocker's Landing. We're not going to talk about Crocker's Landing. Not a lot to talk about there. Even with Torrin, there's not a whole lot to talk about other than the fact that there's the spire of St. Mary's Catholic Church that you can find there, which great polka picnic at St. Mary's in Torrin. So there's that. But there's also something interesting about who is buried in the cemetery by the church in Torrin. And so we started this talking about a Civil War casualty with James Albin. This is a Civil War veteran that we're going to end this talk on. So I'll preface this with, if you have any questions, you put those in the comments. We'll have a little bit of time for that here right after this. But a man named Jacob Gosh is buried in the cemetery. You see his headstone on the right there. He's buried in the cemetery at St. Mary's. Gosh has an interesting claim to fame. He is one of the men who helped capture Confederate President Jefferson Davis after the Civil War. Holy cow, that's crazy. So there's his regiment was stationed in the area where Jefferson Davis was hiding out, and his regiment is who found him. So he was one of a dozen men who went in and got him. Interestingly, another man that was involved in that capture, named Melvin Olin, who was originally from Waukesha, became friends with Jacob Gosh, and at his behest, moved to Stevens Point after the war. So Olin was one of the builders of the first Portage County Courthouse, which doesn't exist anymore, sadly. But Olin is buried at Forest Cemetery. So in our county, we have two of the men who captured Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, after the Union won the Civil War. How crazy is that? So that's the talk tonight. So if you have any questions, I'll hang out for just a second. Otherwise, I really appreciate you tuning in and supporting the Portage County Historical Society. Like I said, the Synagogue Museum on Water Street is open the second Saturday of every month from 10 to 3, as well as we'll be at the Arctic Run Model Train Show at the Holiday Inn coming up this weekend, selling books and merchandise and having more information about how you can get more involved in really what is your historical society. So I hope that you want to become more involved and support more talks like this. If you want to, I'm going to put right in the comments right now how you can become a member. if you so choose. Otherwise, I'm not seeing many comments or questions come through. So what is the next talk, says Chris Dubeck, who is one of our board members. We haven't set that one up yet, but there will be another one coming up in February. So we do these monthly. So just stay tuned, I guess, is what I'd say. If you're a member, you get emails and stuff, but also if you follow our Facebook page, then you can do that. Dustin has a great question here, and that anything about Keene or Liberty Corners. I didn't find a whole lot on either of those. That was really, I was trying to find some of the juicier stories that were going into the talk, but I'm game to do some digging. So about some of those, because I know people obviously lived in these areas and they exist for a reason. But sadly, some of these things have gone away, and so hopefully we can resurrect some of those things. Thanks to Dwayne, excellent presentation. It'd be great to have a booklet on this. I don't doubt it. Yeah, that'd be really cool to put something together. If you're interested in doing any of that, why not, right? Wendy says, have you ever thought about doing a bus tour of some of these historic churches? That's a great idea. I was also thinking bike tour, maybe. So bike tour, bus tour. Maybe do a combination of some of these things. One of the goals that I have as executive director this next year is to maybe get us into some more historic buildings that we don't own, and to bring those things to the public. So thanks, Sue, for checking in. Thanks for that. Thanks to Dustin for checking in. Grottos and shrines. Yeah, there's a lot of shrines. We own a shrine at Conkle's Corners, B and K. So if you're heading east on B out of Plover, you're going to hit. Oh, please don't hit it. It had to get moved because it kept getting hit. But Conkle Corner Shrine, you can see one of. We actually own that there. So we're seeing a lot of great ideas for bus and bike tours. So I'll keep that in my mind as we're planning our programming, and great to know that there'll be support of that, so we can actually sell tickets and use it as a fundraiser with the Historical Society. So Bruce, thanks for checking in, saying you'd be up for a bike tour. So we'll. Just stay tuned. Become a member. You'll find out about these things before anybody else, so you can secure your place on some of these great things. So I'm going to leave it at that. Everybody have a great rest of your week with the snow coming in. Have a great, safe weekend. Hope you dig out fine. And stay tuned for what's next with the Portage County Historical Society. Have a great night. Thanks, everybody.